grew up in Copley Township, which is just outside of Akron. Had a great upbringing, loving mother and father. Interestingly, I come from a family that's politically diverse. My father's a Republican, my mother's a Democrat. And for me, growing up, some of my formative experiences were working on a farm. Not my family's farm, but a family-owned farm just down the road from ours. It's still there. In fact, I still go out and bale hay a couple times a year. And it's Mark Bender's farm in Copley Township, and really enjoy that environment, enjoy being out there, and love to be able to take my kids out. I serve on our agricultural committee, and I represent a district that has a lot of agriculture in it. And so for my children growing up in the suburbs, I want them to have that experience of knowing the food just doesn't show up on the grocery store shelf. It comes from the hard work of Ohioans that provide it for us. And so I enjoy bringing them out there. And then the other real formative experience for me growing up was being a member of a Boy Scout troop. I started when I was 10 years old. The leader of my Boy Scout troop is my hero, and still to this day, a man who I admire greatly. He's in his mid-90s. He's a World War II veteran. And so as a kid, I grew up sitting around the campfire hearing stories about liberating a concentration camp, landing on the beach for the Normandy invasion. And that is part of what inspired me to serve when I turned 18. I wanted to be like Bill Miller. Heck, I still want to be like Bill Miller, and I go to breakfast with him a couple times a year. And I never get tired of hearing the stories that he tells. I had him come down to the State House and speak at the Holocaust Memorial a couple of years ago, and I've heard these stories before, but for me, they're stories worth telling, and that's why he's doing that. He didn't talk about his time in the war a lot until in the last couple of years he heard some of this crazy like Holocaust denial type of thing, and he said, you know, I've seen it with my own eyes. He wanted to make sure people knew that. So those were my experiences. I earned my rank of Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts. Great leadership experience. When you're a 15 or 16-year-old boy and you've got to lead a group of other teenagers and try to get them to accomplish a task, that's a real leadership challenge. And so I carry that forward today. Those lessons that I learned in scouting and those values that I learned in scouting are still with me. Well, I was inspired by the leader of my Boy Scout troop and the sense of patriotism and service. And quite honestly, as an 18-year-old boy, I thought I wanted to do something bigger than myself. I wanted to get out of my hometown and see the world and all of that. But what really drove me was a sense of patriotism. And I remember 10 years old, standing on the side of the parade route in Fairlawn, Ohio at the 4th of July parade. My family always stakes out the same place, puts their chairs down and all of that. And I remember specifically the Iwo Jima flag raising reenactment that these Marines would do. And some of these guys were up there in age, but they would stand perfectly still on the parade float, holding their flag. And I remember looking at those guys thinking, as a 10-year-old, those guys are part of something special. They're different than everybody else. And that part inspired me to want to do that. So it was interesting. I had tried out for the Army Special Forces and been selected, so I was selected to become a Green Beret, however not through the qualification yet, so I wasn't a member of a Special Forces team yet. I was doing a part-time gig working for my dad at his warehouse in Akron, and I remember we were in a sales meeting, and I was the sales helper, the gopher guy that helped the sales reps out. And my uncle came up and interrupted this sales meeting and said, "Turn on the TV, something's happening." And so we turned on the TV, the first plane had hit. Most people at that time thought it was an accident. When the second plane hit, then the mood became a little bit more somber. But I remember, as one of the few veterans there at the time, I said, well, I think we should lower our flag there. And I grabbed one of the other veterans, happened to be a Vietnam veteran, and it was one of those simple moments, but we went out front of my dad's office, the company that my great-grandfather started, and I remember lowering that flag, and I was in civilian clothes, but did a salute when we did it, and thinking, it's a heavy moment for all of us. So, got a snowplow blade here from the Ohio Department of Transportation, and I serve as the transportation chairman in the Senate, but to me it kind of brings back memories. I in the Army was an engineer, and the engineers have the mission of mobility, counter-mobility, and survivability. That's the way that we define military engineering. Mobility means helping the good guys get from point A to point B. Counter-mobility is keeping the bad guys from getting from point A to point B, and survivability, quite simply, is bunkers and fighting positions and that kind of thing, helping the good guys stay alive. And so in Kosovo, one of the missions that I had was snowplowing. I led a squad of engineers that we would, on any given night, be out sort of plowing the mountain passes. There would be times that we'd get 6-8 inches of snow in a night in Kosovo, and at 5 o'clock in the morning I would have a satellite phone call from a 2-star general asking me, "Sergeant LaRose, have you gotten the route clear so I can send the convoys through?" One of the really interesting things was, if you ever watch a snowplow, it throws snow a long way. If they're going 25, 30 miles an hour, it'll throw 20 feet off to the side, big, heavy chunks of snow. And in Kosovo, we had to go slower because if you're throwing that snow off the side of the road, it can actually detonate a landmine. And think about that. And so there were landmines on certain sections of the road we knew were there, but it wasn't worth it to clear them. The road was clear, and they just had a little fence up that said, "Landmines, stay out of here." But if you're throwing snow over there, it can set one of those mines up. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that in Ohio. Actually, Township Trustee Dale Panovich, who's still a Township Trustee in Copley Township, was my 3rd grade librarian at Arrowhead Elementary School. And I remember in 3rd grade thinking it was sort of inconsistent that we had a national flag, we had a state flag, but why doesn't my township have a flag? So I came and talked to my librarian, Dale Panovich, Township Trustee, and I said, "We should have a township flag." She said, "Why don't you contribute that as an idea at our next trustees meeting?" And so I put on the most official looking thing I had, my Cub Scout uniform, right? And I drafted up my idea for the creation of a township flag in Copley Township. And there was this great photo that ran in the newspaper of a little, 4-foot tall me handing my resolution up to the trustees. And later that summer they held a contest at our home days in Copley, and they selected the design, and that became. So I always joke with her that she got me into this mess of being involved, but honestly it's a labor of love, and serving now in the state senate is something that I've enjoyed greatly. Like with most good things, it was a bipartisan effort. We were able to work together and get good bipartisan support on that. Worked on the transportation budget this year, and as you mentioned, it's about an $8 billion budget. It's the funding for the Ohio Department of Transportation. And all of those important projects that keep our economy moving, the logistics that moves Ohio, is a big part of our transportation budget. So I've been thinking about doing this for some time, and it's a natural fit for me. I've become the recognized leader on elections issues in the legislature. One of the first things I worked on when I first arrived here in 2011 was a bill to help overseas military personnel cast their ballots to make it an easier process for our overseas military voters. And that sort of led to me working on a lot of the major elections reforms that we've done over the past few years, including getting rid of that Golden Week period of time, which caused concern for people. The bill that created online voter registration was my bill. Bills that fight fraud by, for example, checking the rolls for non-citizens and making sure that the only people that are registered to vote in Ohio are people that are actually citizens. So I've worked on a lot of those issues, and so back in May, I made the official announcement that I was going to run for Secretary of State. I've been focused on fundraising. That's kind of what you got to do early on. We've had some good success with that. We filed last week with a very respectable number, far and away more than anybody else in the race. But I will say that my Democratic rival is not far behind, and so we're keeping our foot on the pedal and making sure that we're gathering the resources necessary to be successful in this race. And that's going to be a constant grind between now and November of 2018. This week we decided, since we'd been so focused on fundraising, that we should do a statewide tour and really get out there. It's not like I hadn't been. We'd done 38 Lincoln Day dinners, and I've met with, at the time, like 75 Republican chairmen and gone to a lot of picnics and that kind of thing. But we said, let's put a whole week of travel together. So Sunday night I said goodbye to my wife and little girls, and we headed out on the road. We've been in every corner of the state, put thousands of miles on the car, quite honestly, and we were in southeast Ohio, from Marietta to Portsmouth, and from Scioto County, Jackson County, and from there up through Fayette County, and Clark County. Spoke in Dayton at their Central Committee meeting, and up to Toledo, and then yesterday down through Central Ohio. Made it over to the Richland County Fair yesterday. Here we are today at the Champaign County Fair. Earlier in the week I was at the Scioto County Fair. So we're trying to meet people in every part of the state. A lot of these are meetings with Republican leaders. We've had our county chairmen and women in each county organize a meet and greet where we meet for breakfast and talk with people about what's on their mind. And then we visited a couple county boards of elections as well to learn more about the work that they do to conduct elections. So we're having a lot of fun and putting a lot of miles on the car, but most importantly, we're building that grassroots strength that we're going to need to be successful next year, and that's what's so important.
What are you hearing from the people of Ohio?
A couple things. I think first and foremost, the focus that most people have continues to be jobs in our economy and growing a business and that kind of thing. And the Secretary of State's office plays a key role in that as the front door for any new business filing. Secretary Husted has done a good job at reducing the fees and increasing the ease with which people can create a new business in Ohio. That's something I'm going to continue to work on. In fact, we introduced a bill this week that helps businesses fight fraud through the Secretary of State's office, and making sure that if someone else has started a business that's very similarly named to theirs, maybe just change one letter or make it plural versus singular, that the Secretary's office, under my bill, would then be able to notify those businesses so that they can take action if they need to, if somebody's trying to, again, commit fraud. But one of the other things that's on people's mind is our elections, naturally, and this has been something that really has always been a focus for a lot of us. The fact is that fraud occurs. It's rare, but when it occurs, it's serious. Any instance of fraud is one too many. And so there are smart things that we can do to make sure that our elections are continue to be conducted in a way that's relatively free of fraud, where every Ohioan has access to the right to vote. And these are things that we can move forward together with on a parallel track. I mean, we can continue to improve the ease of voting and the access to voting, but at the same time we can fight against fraud. And for some reason, too often people sort of retreat to their partisan corners on these issues, but I have a background of working in a bipartisan way. I've been able to do that by just simply sitting and talking with my colleagues and finding areas where we can work together, and that's the kind of thing I'll be doing as Secretary of State starting in 2019. Well, it's precious. I've seen people risk their lives to cast a ballot in Kosovo and in Iraq. I happened to be there in both of those combat zones when people had the right to vote for the first time, and that's a remarkable thing. It's something that maybe too many of us take for granted. I tell the story about the Iraqis would dip their fingers in purple ink, and it was a simple method to make sure people didn't vote twice, right? If you already had purple ink on your finger, that meant you'd cast your ballot and you couldn't do it again. Well, they were enormously proud of that. But what a lot of us don't realize is, years ago as we were watching those images, is what a defiant act that was to raise that purple finger in the air. And by the way, this was men and women in a culture where historically women had not had a voice. And so they were told by the Al-Qaeda element in southern Iraq that if they saw purple ink on their fingers, they'd cut them off. They said it was un-Islamic to vote, which is nonsense, of course. There's nothing un-Islamic about being a part of the future of your country. But despite that, threats of violence, they had over 70% voter turnout where I was in southern Iraq. Now, nobody cuts fingers off here in Ohio, and seldom do we get a 70% voter turnout. What it tells you is that there's something about the human nature. We don't want to be told what to do. We want to chart our own course. We want to determine our own destiny for us and for our children. That's what we do at election time. We have the opportunity to be citizens instead of subjects, and that's the difference, right? If you have the vote, if you have the franchise, the ability to make your voice heard, then you're no longer a subject, you're a citizen. We've only had that for 230 years in this country. It's a really rare thing in human history that people have had that. I want to defend that, I want to protect that, and that's what I'll do. So redistricting falls into two categories. There's state legislative redistricting, and then there's congressional redistricting. Thankfully, we put in place a much better method for state legislative redistricting 2 years ago with Issue 1. I was instrumental in that. We worked on it at 4:30 in the morning. We finally passed the bill that got it done, and it was something that was a long time coming. And so we've got a better process in place for the way that state legislative lines are drawn. Now, the question that remains is, are we going to update the way that congressional districts are drawn? There's an effort underway currently to change that. It's a group that's gathering signatures. I don't support that effort. I think that we should do something through the legislature. The fact is, when you go through the legislative process, you have a much more deliberative process where people can make changes to it, find bipartisan consensus on it. And so that's what I hope that we do. I've introduced Senate Joint Resolution 3 that would put a much more balanced process in place for drawing congressional lines, and I hope that my colleagues will take that up, hopefully this fall, so that we can offer an alternative to this initiative effort that's currently gathering signatures. But moving ahead to 2021, God willing, if things go well next fall, I'll be serving as Secretary of State at that point. And I have a history is in charge of this process, and that's no bull. We want to make sure that one of our own is in charge of this process, but also somebody that understands the process and can work to get fair districts done, truly fair districts, not one side or the other, and that's what I bring to the effort. I've had the chance to do a lot in 38 years, led men and women in combat, serve in the state legislature. By far the most important job I've ever had and the most important job I will ever have is being a daddy. And for my 3 little girls, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, that's a job I take very seriously. And one of the unfortunate aspects of running a statewide campaign is that you sacrifice some time with the family. We're doing this statewide tour where we're covering every part of Ohio, but I remember just a couple days ago vividly, this is probably going to be locked in my head forever, Sunday night, this past Sunday, as I was pulling out of the driveway to leave on a 7-day statewide tour, all the little noses pressed up against the window, waving goodbye. I think that we, not only did all 3 of them, but I think I had a tear in my eye pulling out of the driveway, but it's also a reminder. You know, we live in a time where there's a lot of cynicism, and much of it is not misplaced. But there are a few of us, many of us, I believe, that do public service for the right reasons. For me, my motivation is those 3 little girls and tens of thousands of others like them throughout Ohio. They're a constant reminder of why I serve, and when sometimes it feels like you're you know, knocking your head against a wall, or you're frustrated by the process or the bureaucracy or whatever else, I remember back to them, and that reminds me why I chose to enter this line of work for this time being. As a husband, my center of gravity is my wife, the source of strength in my life. And I remember having this conversation with a friend a couple months ago. You know, this is the woman that stood by me as I served in combat, and stood by me when I had this crazy idea about running for the state senate. And now she stands by my side and supports me as I'm running for statewide office. That's a special kind of love, and Lauren LaRose is my best friend.